Also indicate that I'm the Chief Elections Official. My title officially is Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. So we'll get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here in Asheville, North Carolina on this beautiful fall day with some noise in the background since we're at a distribution site also. But I'm Karen Brinson Bell. I'm the Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. With me is Corrine Duncan. She is the Buncombe County Elections Director, and she will also provide remarks this afternoon before we take questions. Today is remarkable, not only for the weather, but because it is the first day of in-person early voting in North Carolina. Right behind us, voters are casting ballots at the Wesley Grant Southside Center early voting site, one of 419 early voting sites that opened across North Carolina today, and one of 10 sites in Buncombe County open for their voters. This county was one of the hardest hit by Helene. Sadly, more lives were lost in this county than any other by far. During my 4-hour drive to the mountains this morning, I traveled from my current home in the state capital of Raleigh to my longtime former home, the North Carolina mountains. I'm a graduate of UNC Asheville, and I lived and worked in Buncombe County and nearby Henderson and Transylvania counties for 2 decades of my life. My first job in elections administration was with the State Board of Elections to serve as field support for the 12 westernmost counties of our state. I have served as the elections director for 4 years in Transylvania County, which is just south of here. This area is as much home to me as Raleigh or where I grew up in rural eastern North Carolina in Duplin County. This is my first time back since the storm hit in late September. And I drove up here this morning and I felt anxiety and some trepidation about what I would find. And yet, the serenity that I feel each and every time I climb that mountain from Old Fort into the Swananoa River Valley, it soothed me again this morning. And beneath the layers of mud and the fallen trees and other destruction, the mountains showed their majesty, the leaves sparkled in their fall glory, and I wiped away tears of sorrow and joy, because though not unscathed, we have made it through this storm. It's the people of this region that have made this the most possible. They are tough, they are resilient, and have been hell-bent on recovering from this storm and building their lives back, and for themselves and for their family. I stand here knowing that this area looked worse last week and looked worse than that the week before. As election officials, we are so grateful to everyone working to bring back some sense of normalcy to Western North Carolina. And we are grateful to everyone who is bringing back the infrastructure needed to run elections. The roads and the bridges, cell service, power, internet, and water, the things that are essential for everyday life, but are also important for us to make sure people can vote. And because of this hard work, I am here today to tell you that this morning, in-person early voting opened as expected in all 100 North Carolina counties. That includes 76 early voting sites in the 25 counties in the Helene disaster area, down only 4 from the 80 early voting sites originally planned. This is an incredible accomplishment. It is the realization of one of my favorite election saying, when a disaster strikes, we don't stop elections, we figure out how to proceed. That's exactly what we've done. The fact that voters are casting their ballots a stone's throw away from me is a testament to that. Since this storm hit, election officials in this state have been working long hours to ensure Western North Carolina can vote. Here are a few ways we are doing that. Within a couple of days of the storm, we launched ncsbe.gov/Helene, a dedicated web page where voters can get tips on voting in Western North Carolina and where the world can see everything we are doing to ensure accessible voting options in the mountains. The State Board of Elections has been in routine contact with all county boards of elections in this region through our field support and the actions we are taking in direct response to the problems they are facing and the needs on the ground in these areas. Within a week of the storm, the bipartisan State Board of Elections voted unanimously on a series of emergency measures designed to help the county boards of elections in Western North Carolina have the flexibility to provide voting for their voters despite the damage and giving voters their ballot in the region additional ways to request and return absentee ballots. The North Carolina General Assembly followed that with a unanimous vote of its own to further ensure the voters of Western North Carolina can make their voices heard in 2024. We've coordinated every step of the way with FEMA, the North Carolina Department of Emergency Management, the North Carolina National Guard, and other partners to ensure that we get internet service, portable restrooms, and generators to counties that needed them for their early voting sites. We are now working with these same partners to deploy special, sturdy tent-like structures to serve as election day polling places where buildings are unusable or washed away by floodwaters. We have met routinely with representatives from the U.S. Postal Service to get updates on mail delivery, where mail can be delivered and where it can't. When they identify roads where mail cannot be delivered, county election officials reach out to voters in those areas who have requested absentee ballots to notify them of the situation and let them know of their voting options. Just yesterday, we launched an outreach effort to help us reach the voters of Western North Carolina with paid advertisements on social media, radio, websites, and other digital media, and in newspapers. Once again, we are here today to commemorate the start of in-person early voting, North Carolina's most popular voting method. 4 years ago, 65% of our voters chose this method to cast their ballot. We expect 2024 will be much the same or better. I know that thousands of North Carolinians lost so much in the storm. Their lives will never be the same after this tragedy. But one thing Helene did not take from Western North Carolinians is the right to vote this important election that will help determine who will lead this local area, this state, and this country in the coming years. I stand here today to encourage all North Carolinians to exercise this right. Let's break the turnout record of 2020 once again this year in North Carolina. And with that, I will turn it over to the remarkable, someone I admire greatly, even before this storm, but all the more so over the last few weeks, Corrine Duncan, the Elections Director of Buncombe County. She and her staff and the county board members are among true heroes of this recovery and of our democracy. Without them, Buncombe County voters would not be voting today. Thank you, Corrine, and I'll turn it over to you for some remarks. And then we'll answer questions.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm Corrine Duncan, C-O-R-I-N-N-E-D-U-N-C-A-N, and I am the Director of Elections for Buncombe County. Buncombe is the largest county in western North Carolina. I think I need my mic.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. So I'm Corrine Duncan. I'm the Director of Elections for Buncombe County. Buncombe's the largest county in western North Carolina. We cover 660 square miles. We have 214,000 registered voters. We support 80 election day locations and a robust early voting plan. This is big, but western North Carolina, which is just part of the storm-affected area, is bigger. And every one of us was impacted by Hurricane Helene. I'm humbled and proud of the response from our region and nationally, which continues to bring us out of crisis. Friends, family, neighbors, and public servants from an ever-growing number of places are operating in unison to support this mission. It's moving and inspiring and necessary. This situation is difficult to explain if you're not living in it. My personal experience is in Asheville's River Arts District. The day of the flood, I watched the waters grow until the river blocked the road in both directions in front of the building where I live. It took power lines with it. A parent and child escaped a stalled vehicle after trying to cross the water. Dumpsters and pieces of buildings, shipping containers, and propane tanks rushed by us. But also, as neighbors, we came together to move an artist's life work out of harm's way. It gave us a sense of agency in an uncontrollable situation. When the river crested, I was lucky. The water didn't reach where I live, but my neighborhood that we're in right now was destroyed. And it wasn't even the hardest hit. Others have lost much more. These days after the storm have been surreal. Constant sirens, helicopters dropping food, police escorted water trucks. And in the face of all this, your election officials have come together. The day after the storm, we began congregating at the office. Our building was one of a tiny number of locations that had power, but there was no water, no cell service, the stoplights weren't working, and the roads were blocked by downed trees. But we immediately took action to comfort and care for each other. We were able to account for all. We made sure everyone had food and water and a place to stay. This early attention to basic needs allowed us to quickly return to work, assuring our community that voting would go on. Many in my office sent their families to safer locations and stayed behind themselves to put absentee ballots in the mail, start assessing voting locations, and begin contacting our poll workers. We found that not all of our poll workers or voting locations were available, but we do have many of them, and we're grateful. We've worked long hours, yesterday was a 16-hour day, to find solutions to hurdles, and we're now caught up with absentee processing. We have a strong early voting plan that started today. And just yesterday, our board unanimously passed adjustments to our election day locations. We are ensuring that voters have every opportunity to cast their ballot this election and that they do so securely. This is important for many, many reasons, and one of them is that voters are asking for us. The Monday after the storm, we had knocks on the door wanting to know whether the election was going to happen, and we were able to confidently say yes. The right to cast a ballot is valued, and it also represents, in yet another way, how our community is rising together. Elections are about the future, and together we will choose the people that represent us both in good times and in tragedy. Buncombe County, Buncombe County in Western North Carolina has a voice. Thank you.
We can take questions now. Just raise your hand. I'll call on you, and you can decide who you want to ask questions to. CNN in the back.
Yes. So our absentee by mail ballot requests are not where we were with the pandemic, but they are higher than where we were in 2016. So, which seems like a more normal point of comparison. To your other question, and we are going to try to repeat the question since it may be difficult for folks who don't have mics here that might be listening to know what some of the answers are, or what the question was. So to your other question, it has been terrific turnout statewide for early voting today. As we drove here, we were hearing of lines in Haywood County where it was 30 degrees while they stood in line this morning before the site opened. We've heard similar reports out of Cary in Wake County, the county of our state capital, and just many of the same information is coming in from all across the state. We won't know our actual turnout for the day until the sites close this evening, but it is anticipated that this may actually be our best early voting day ever, or at least for the opening day, which is what we experienced in 2020. So we'll see. Good weather always helps with voting.
Yep. CCB.
I will try to answer that question, which is about how we're able to contact people who may not have good lines of communication, and if there's anything Corinne can add to that, certainly. So we do know that the Postal Service has really reduced the number of undeliverable sites considerably. And so when they can't deliver, they are holding the mail for those individuals at their servicing post office. So we're able to work with them, that way in terms of communication. One of the ways that we're going to utilize the funds that were authorized by the legislature and signed into law by the governor is to make sure that we are communicating through radio, through social media. We know not everyone has access to the internet, but we know that the radio has been a big, maybe the biggest way that people are learning information through the storm, and especially when you're in isolated areas. So that's definitely a focus. We have been putting information out at many of the relief sites and shelters. A lot of the early voting sites in the Helene affected counties are co-located with some of those services. So we are hopeful that that alone is helping us to reach some of those affected citizens that may still not have good lines of communication. Would you add anything, Corinne?
I think the only other thing that I would add is that during this, we really did see neighbors come together and communities come together and have their own social networks. And so we're making sure that to encourage people to do word of mouth, tell people, get the information and pass it along.
I'll also say we've continued to do these media availabilities, and we'll continue to do so because you as the media have helped us to convey this information, and we appreciate that. And also just to make sure that they're getting accurate sources of information. So the question is around, do we see scenarios where someone will be or individuals will be isolated to the point that they might have to walk into their polling place, walk to get to their ballot. We do still have some communities affected like that, and today members of our staff and the state emergency management are actually having a dedicated meeting because they have been able to identify these isolated communities or most of the isolated communities, and so that'll help us to develop some strategic plans to serve those. But I have a heartwarming story out of Yancey County that just came about this week where they had identified an isolated community where the Salvation Army had been able to set up a tent. We're going to be able to use that tent for voting, and while we did not have a appointed election worker in that isolated area, there were individuals who said, when we went out into that community, they said, we'll do it, just train us. And so, this isolated community is going to, just like they've been helping cut down trees and share food and so forth, they're going to make sure that they are together able to vote.
A quick question about how getting election results might be impacted by this storm. We were late driving from Buncombe County, stuck behind a dump truck, which was doing much more important work than us. But in this time where the validity of elections, there's trust in those things, if the results are slow coming in, what work is being talked about to try and address making sure that precincts way out, wherever they may be, won't have challenges getting those results in, so those come quicker rather than later?
So there actually are already provisions with our law, and let me repeat the question. Sorry, he was asking about how we'll see results come in given the Helene circumstances. So there is already a provision within our law that allows for counties to request to return their supplies and materials the day after the election, but they do a call-in system so that we can still report the results. We will be working with the counties for circumstances where that's necessary. Typically those are counties where they have a ferry system or isolated along the Outer Banks, but we will certainly consider those requests and work with them. That does not change the security or the accuracy of these results. It just means that they have to identify a plan and work through that. So when November 5th comes around, we are going to have results on election night from all 100 counties and all affected areas. I can say that with the utmost confidence. We just may have to make some special provisions on how those workers get home and have assistance getting them home safely. We'll have some of the same measures put in place to make sure our county staff get home securely and safely, and that those ballot and election materials get back to the county office securely and safely.
Yes, ma'am.
What advice do you have for those who may have lost personal identification, such as birth certificate, driver's license, things like that?
Okay. The question is about folks who have lost their ID or identification of some type. So we do have photo ID in place now in North Carolina. That became effective in the fall of 2023, but this is obviously the largest election where we will have photo ID in place, and it's in the midst of a disaster. Our state law provides that there are a number of acceptable types of ID. Most will show their driver's license, but there is also a provision that allows for an exception form, and this was in place even prior to Helene. Within that exception form is a option if you have lost your ID or cannot obtain an ID because of natural disaster in the last 100 days, you can complete the exception form and we can still allow that person to vote. They will state their name and address like every voter and like they always do with any election when they check in, and then they will be offered the exception form if they do not have an adequate form of ID. Thank you. Yes, and we still are offering free photo IDs at the County Board of Elections offices. They go in, we confirm them in the voter registration system, and then we can provide them an ID, a photo ID for voting purposes at the County Board offices. I'll speak generally, but I think this would probably be a great story or point of reference for Corrine to talk about. It has been remarkable. As we have met with the affected counties, we have touch point meetings to find out what their needs are, to see what things we need to action quickly for them. And we thought that poll workers would be one of the primary things. Now, after 2020, we set up our Democracy Heroes website where people can sign up to work in any county in North Carolina, that's available where they can work in their county of registration. But so we continue to have people who sign up through that. We've had other organizations like Vet the Vote that have provided us with names. But the truly inspiring thing is that so many of the people who are in these affected counties may have lost their homes, may have had their cars damaged, but they have reached out to the county boards and said, I am a committed poll worker and I'm going to do this for my fellow citizens, for the members of my community, because it's a way I can give back. And it's also, we have to remember, and folks aren't approaching the county board offices for pay, but there is at least some small pay. And so what the county offices said to us is that they are going to be all the more persistent to hire people from within the county so that there is a point of income for them when many of them have lost their sources of income during this devastation. So we're seeing that as a way that elections are giving back to the community as well. Even though the provisions within the state board's resolution and the law did allow for us to have workers from outside of the county of registration in these 25 counties, ultimately the very people who have served their members of the community are going to serve their members again. But what would you like to add to that?
So for Buncombe County in particular, for the early voting period, we had already trained all of those workers, and about 2/3 of those were able to still work, which is amazing because that's a 17-day commitment that they were unsure of what conditions would be like in the future. For Election Day, we have not contacted all of the poll workers yet. We've just got a sliver left, and we have over 90% of Election Day workers are still going to serve. And so, just like Karen said, it's an amazing commitment, and I think that people are looking for a way, continue in all the different ways to contribute to their community, and the poll workers are absolutely doing that, and we're so lucky. It wasn't just voters that were knocking on our door. We had training that week right after the storm, which we had to cancel, but they were coming up saying, are we still doing training? What's going on? So we have some very caring, dedicated people supporting elections.
Miguel.
So that was the question around security at our facilities and any issues or concerns around fraud. With all of our early voting sites, remarkably as well, we were either able to continue in a site that had been identified or they were able to relocate to other facilities. So we are not in temporary structures. So these are brick and mortar buildings just like the one you see behind me that are able to be secured. They may not have water, but they all have power, which is also just a testament to our utility workers and the linemen who made that possible. Security is in place. There is nothing about a disaster that changes the security measures that we have in place. We may actually heighten security measures, but we don't change what we do. So we have tested the equipment. We have sealed the machines. We have chain of custody as we hand off these materials to the early voting sites, and we will do that on Election Day. Those will be returned to us through a chain of custody procedure and some of the same security seals and measures that we do. We will post-election test or audit and to verify that the tabulators were working correctly. Now, in terms of the security, the physical security of our workers and so forth, I think what we certainly know of a situation in one of these affected counties where someone appeared to to have plans to harm FEMA workers. We have not been directly targeted that we have been made aware of, but elections have been under attack for years now. And so the landscape that we're working in certainly has had us very aware of physical security measures that we need to take, and the counties have done that. They have to address each of their own situations. Sometimes it's panic buttons, sometimes it's just the training we've had with de-escalation and things of that nature. But we are definitely mindful of keeping the workers secure, of having a secure experience for the voters. But I think what we're really seeing in this time of disaster is a coming together of people. And hopefully, that brings civility back into the voting process. It's wonderful to hear laughter and conversation happening as people behind us are standing in line. And it's, I think there's just a recognition that we are North Carolinians. We are not blue, red, purple. We are not of a certain party. We may be, but that is important when we're marking our ballot. But when we're standing in line together, when we're working together, we are there for the purpose of anyone to be able to exercise their right to vote and to make sure that we are casting our ballots in support of the future of North Carolina.
To exactly that end, there's about 15,000 bottles of water over there. A lift keeps driving behind you to deliver more. Did you ever doubt that there would be people standing behind you here today ready to vote?
One, I think the question is about, did I ever question that there would be people standing behind me ready to vote given the circumstances? I think my mindset is that it actually is incentivizing people all the more to get out and vote. They know, as Corrine said, they are deciding about who will lead us during times of normalcy, during the good times, and during the times of disaster. So, I hope that the fact that we've got our sites open, that we are conducting elections, and that they have the opportunity to come out to vote is one, helping them to find normalcy again after the storm, and also is their way of giving back in a sense, because they are going to have a say on any future disasters, and who will lead them through that. And I hope that that this will be more incentive, and we'll actually see a greater turnout because of this. So, no, I really didn't question whether we would see people turn out. It's exactly what I had hoped for, and that's tremendous turnout. These are critical elections in our state. We are a battleground state, and there's a lot of attention to us because of the presidential contest. But we will have a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, a new attorney general. We'll have many members newly elected to our legislature, and at local races for county commission and so forth. And so it is critical that North Carolinians get out and vote, because their actions between now and November 5th will have such a pivotal impact on their lives for the next 2 and 4 years and even further.
Is there a number of people in Asheville that had to leave, have to evacuate, also in other places? Is there special accommodation for the voting people that might be out of state? And the second thing, on this last minute changes, is there any indication of litigation from any of the candidates or expectation of litigation to those changes?
So the first question, and I don't have a pen to remember these two-parters. The first question was about displaced people and things that we'll do, and then the second question is about litigation. So to the first question, and I'll certainly let Corrine speak specifically to Buncombe County and the numbers that she may be familiar with, but within the resolution passed by the state board and then by the legislature, they incorporated some of those provisions. We have allowed for individuals who request an absentee ballot. That can always be mailed to any address that they so choose. It does not have to be mailed to a voter's home address. So those voters who may have already requested a ballot and had it damaged in the storm or something of that nature, they can make another request, and we can indicate that in our system and track that effectively and get that out to whatever address they would like that sent to. Once they receive their absentee by mail ballot, they are certainly, by the provisions, the voters of the 25 affected counties can have that delivered themselves or by a near relative or legal guardian to any county board of elections or early voting site in North Carolina. But I will also emphasize the mail system is working. The county boards are able to send out mail, they're able to receive mail, and so voters who may have gone to other parts of our country because of housing or whatever circumstances, they are able to request an absentee ballot, have that sent to them, and then they can mail that back to their county board of elections without issue. We have some other provisions in terms of early voting. A voter can go to any site in their county of registration. That has not changed because of the storm. That is available to any voter. They can go to any early voting site in their county. So if the road's washed out and they can access another route to an early voting site, they can certainly do that. We're hopeful that we're able to address voting for those who are displaced. We had if there's any good fortune in this devastation, it's that it hit early enough that we can still be responsive and still get those ballots out and back in a timely manner. Do you want to address that one, or you want me to go on to the second question?
Just really quickly, just for Buncombe County, for some data, we've already had 15,000 absentee requests, so people are really utilizing that method of voting. And as Karen said, a focus on making sure that there's a strong early voting plan. Things will improve as we go. Roads are opening up every day. We're learning how to navigate roads that aren't open. And so making sure that our election day plan is accessible to the communities out in the far reaches of the county is really important too.
His second question, yeah. So about litigation, we do not have any litigation that has been filed pertaining to the response to Helene. We should emphasize that the initial resolution passed by the State Board of Elections, which is a 5-member bipartisan board, was unanimous. And then in our legislature, it was a unanimous vote by them to incorporate many of the provisions. There is other litigation that is going on in our state, but it's not pertinent to Helene, and so we are working through that. I greatly appreciate the question, but I will not be able to answer it. It was about the number of ballots that have been returned in the 25 affected counties. We do have that data accessible, downloadable on our state board website, but as much as I like to think I can remember all those numbers, I'm not that gifted. So the question was about the security of a ballot being returned to another location. Remember, they're returning these ballots, if they so choose, to other county boards of elections. We have logs. We are date stamping and time stamping those because the law did not change. Any North Carolinian who chooses to vote absentee by mail must have that ballot back to the County Board of Elections by 7:30 p.m. Election Day. The only exception is that those in the affected counties may return that by 7:30 p.m. Election Day to a County Board of Elections, or they could have returned it to any early voting site in the state. But the logs are in place, the tracking is in place. Folks can also still sign up for the ballot track service when they request an absentee by mail ballot, and they can then follow that ballot in the mail stream, which is another reason why we do encourage them to continue to mail them back to their County Board of Elections. The security procedures have not changed. It's just that now they are the voters in the 25 affected counties, if they so choose, can return it to another county board of elections, who is also administering elections through the uniform and proven methods that we have in place to secure ballots and to ensure the chain of custody on those ballots.
Any other questions?
I'm a huge procrastinator. What's the last day I should request my absentee ballot by? Especially if I live in like Buncombe County or somewhere.
Question about the deadline. So the absentee by mail deadline to request an absentee ballot in North Carolina is October the 29th. We encourage people, if they are interested in voting absentee by mail, think that they might and are not sure, make that request now so that we can get those materials in the mail to you. The easiest way to request an absentee ballot is through our online portal at ncsbe.gov. It will help you complete the form. You put in your information. It'll ensure that you've got all the right fields completed and go directly to the County Board of Elections so that they can process those requests. If you decide you do not want to vote absentee by mail, that is fine. You can still you can discard that ballot and still go to an early voting site or an election day site if that's your preferred method of voting is in person. But please do not procrastinate on making that request if you do want to vote absentee by mail. October 29th is the deadline, but that is 1 week before Election Day. So our ability to turn that around and then the voter be able to get it back in time by 7:30 p.m. on Election Day is a pretty tight turnaround, and the Postal Service has advised people to allow at least a week for the return of their ballot, even prior to Helene. So we want to emphasize that. Right now, in terms of the Election Day sites and the temporary structures, the tents, the blank slate tents, we have not completely finalized Election Day sites. Buncombe even met until the wee hours of the night last night working out their plan. So we anticipate having that list potentially finalized by tomorrow. We are also we've received most of the requests, but we are working, as I mentioned today, on making sure that we do account for any isolated communities, which might increase the number of tents that we would need. But right now we have 13 requested temporary structures, which we call blank slate tents, that are being organized by the North Carolina Emergency Management.
Send me an email and we can give you that data as soon as we have it.
I will emphasize, though, the vast majority of Election Day sites will be open in our state and in the affected counties.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so the turnout is wonderful. We've had over 3,000 voters so far in just the few hours that we've been open. That is similar to 2020, so we're seeing high numbers. And you know, Karen's talking about the request for temporary structures and what are we doing on Election Day. We've identified locations for all of the sites, every 80 precinct in Buncombe County, all 80 precincts in Buncombe County. But conditions are improving. So as the weeks pass, we've requested things for locations that don't have power and things like that. But we might not need those resources as we move forward. So we will strive as much as possible to have locations be as similar to the past as they were, so that people can they know their usual voting locations and can go to those.
Anybody else? All right, thank you everybody for being here. Just reach out if you have any additional questions. We'll be happy to help.
Were you? Okay.